So let me share a bit about myself and my wife, Jessica. We've been married for 6 years now. It's just the two of us with no kids, living what I believed was a fairly normal life. Jessica is a dynamo, smart, beautiful, and fiercely independent. Perhaps a bit too independent. Lately, she's been acting oddly, and it's been driving me insane. This all began a few months ago when she started arriving home later than usual. Initially, it was the occasional late night at work, but soon it became a regular thing. I'm talking about 2 or 3 times a week. Each time she'd come in with some excuse. Meetings, deadlines, traffic. She seemed constantly on edge, as if she was hiding something. One night, she returned home, even later than usual. I was already in bed, pretending to sleep, but I saw her quietly slip into the bedroom, tiptoeing to avoid waking me. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly silenced it, but not before I caught a glimpse of a name on the screen. R. I'm not typically the jealous type, but something about her behavior unsettled me. The next morning, I confronted her. Jessica, who's Ryan? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. She barely looked up from her coffee. Oh, he's just a colleague. We've been working on a project together late into the night. I pressed on, hiding my irritation. She finally looked at me, her eyes hardening. Yes, late into the night. We have deadlines, Kevin. Not everything revolves around you. That stung, but I let it go. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was just work. But doubt had taken root, and it was growing quickly. Last week, things escalated. Jessica had been out again, supposedly working late. I decided to call her office to check. The receptionist informed me that Jessica had left hours earlier. My heart sank. When she eventually came home, I confronted her again. Jessica, where were you really? She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. At work, Kevin. Where else? Your office said you left hours ago. I replied, my voice trembling. She hesitated, but only for a moment. I stopped by Ryan's place to go over some documents. We needed privacy to discuss a sensitive issue. And you couldn't do that here at home? I was nearly shouting. Ryan's place is closer. Okay, stop being so paranoid. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my mind racing. Something was definitely wrong. I needed to uncover the truth. The next day, I decided to follow her. I felt like a creep, but I had to know what was going on. Jessica left the house at her usual time, and I followed her, keeping a safe distance. She drove to an unfamiliar neighborhood and parked in front of a modest-looking house, presumably Ryan's place. I waited, watching as she got out of the car and went inside. An hour passed, then 2. My heart was pounding. What was she doing in there? Finally, she emerged, but she wasn't alone. A tall, older man followed her, and they stood by her car, talking and laughing. My blood boiled. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling. When she returned home that night, I couldn't contain myself any longer. I followed you today, I blurted out the moment she walked in. She froze, her eyes widening. You did what? I followed you to Ryan's place. I saw you with him. What's really going on, Jessica? She stared at me for a moment. Then her expression changed to one of amusement. So you followed me, spying on your own wife? That's pretty low, even for you, Kevin. I needed to know the truth, I shouted, my anger reaching its peak. She sighed and shook her head. You want the truth? Fine. Ryan and I are involved. It's not what you think. It's just comfort we both needed. Comfort. I echoed, my voice breaking. You're cheating on me and calling it comfort? She stepped closer, her eyes turning cold. I'm not cheating, Kevin. You never listen, do you? You're always wrapped up in your own world. Ryan understands me in a way you never could. Her words cut deep, and I felt a surge of anger mixed with pain. So what now? Are you leaving me for him? She laughed, a bitter sound. Leave you? No, Kevin. I'm not leaving. I'm staying right here, but things are going to change. What do you mean? I asked, a chill running down my spine. You'll see, she said cryptically, turning away. You'll see. I watched her walk away, a sense of dread settling over me. This was just the beginning, and I had a feeling things were about to get much worse. That night, I tossed and turned, my mind a whirlpool of confusion and anger. Jessica's words echoed in my head. What did she mean by things were going to change? And what exactly was going on between her and Ryan? By morning, I was exhausted but determined to get answers. Jessica acted as if nothing had happened, going about her morning routine with an infuriating normality. I watched her from across the kitchen table, searching for the right moment to bring it up again. "Jessica, we need to talk," I finally said, breaking the silence. She looked up from her phone, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, about what?" "You know what? About this thing with Ryan." She sighed, setting her phone down. "What is there to talk about, Kevin? I told you everything last night." "No, you didn't. You just said it was comfort, whatever that means. I want to know what's really going on." Jessica leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Fine, you want the truth? Here it is. Ryan and I have been exploring something different, something that fulfills needs. We both have needs you clearly don't care about." "What kind of needs?" I asked, my voice trembling. She gave me a calculating look. "Intimate needs, Kevin. We are exploring our fantasies together. He makes me feel alive in ways you never have." Her bluntness hit me like a punch to the gut. "So what? You're just going to keep seeing him and expect me to be okay with it?" Jessica's expression softened slightly. "I don't expect you to be okay with it, but I'm not giving it up either, and I don't want to leave you. I still love you, Kevin, in my own way." I was at a loss for words. The woman I loved was standing in front of me, telling me she was sleeping with another man and had no intention of stopping. How was I supposed to respond to that? "You're insane," I muttered, shaking my head. "This is madness." "Maybe," she conceded, "but it's the truth. And there's something else I've been wanting to tell you." I looked up, my heart sinking more. Jessica nodded, a peculiar smile forming on her lips. "Ryan and I want you to be involved, to watch us. It's something that excites me, and I think it might help you understand." "Watch you?" I repeated, horrified. "You expect me to watch you with another man?" "Yes," she responded simply, "and we want to record it for ourselves for the experience. It's something we both desire to try, and I believe it could benefit us, our marriage." I couldn't fathom what I was hearing. "You've lost your mind, Jessica. This is twisted." She shrugged. "Perhaps, but it's what I want, and I think deep down you might be curious about it too. You've always been so conventional, Kevin. Don't you ever want to explore something different?" "No, Jessica, I don't," I said firmly. "This is too much. I can't go through with this." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Well, you might want to rethink that, because if you don't, I'm not sure how much longer we can pretend this marriage is working." Her ultimatum hung heavily in the air between us. I felt cornered by the woman I thought I knew and loved. "Consider it," she said quietly. "I know it's a lot to take in, but this is what I need, Kevin. This is who I am, and if you love me, you'll at least think about it." I stared at her, words failing me. Jessica stood up and left the room, leaving me alone with my tumultuous thoughts. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, hurt, and a hint of something I couldn't quite name, perhaps curiosity. As the days went by, I couldn't stop thinking about her proposition. It was crazy, yes, but there was a part of me, a hidden dark part, that wondered what it would be like to see her in that light, to watch her with another man, to understand this side of her I had never seen before. I hated myself for even considering it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to know. I had to understand what had happened to my marriage, to the woman I loved. So one night, as we sat in the living room, I finally gave her my answer. "Okay, Jessica, I'll do it. I'll watch," I said, my voice steady but filled with a mix of dread and determination. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "You will?" she asked, almost breathless. "Yes," I replied, "but this doesn't mean I'm okay with it. I'm doing this because I need to understand, and if I can't, if this doesn't help, then we're done." Jessica smiled, stood up, and sat next to me. "Thank you, Kevin. You have no idea how much this means to me." As she kissed me, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I was about to step into a world I didn't understand, driven by a desperate need to save my marriage, or maybe to finally understand it was beyond saving. The days leading up to the planned event felt like a surreal nightmare. Jessica was more cheerful than she had been in months, her excitement palpable. Meanwhile, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, each step closer to the moment that could either save or destroy our marriage. Jessica arranged everything. She said it would be best if we did it at Ryan's place, where we wouldn't be disturbed. The thought of going to the house where she had been meeting him, where they had shared their comfort, made my stomach churn. But I kept telling myself this was for us, to understand her, and maybe even fix what was broken. The night finally came. Jessica and I drove to Ryan's house in tense silence. When we arrived, Ryan greeted us with an unsettlingly warm smile, as if we were old friends meeting for dinner. I tried to return the smile, but it probably looked more like a grimace. "Glad you could make it, Kevin," Ryan said, extending his hand. "Jessica's told me a lot about you." "Yeah," I muttered, shaking his hand reluctantly. "I've heard a lot about you, too." Jessica led me into the living room, where a camera was set up on a tripod. The sight of it made my heart race. This was really happening. I was about to watch my wife with another man, and it was going to be recorded. A wave of nausea hit me, but I forced it down, determined to see this through. "We start slow," Jessica said, her voice both gentle and firm. "Just watch, okay? You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." I nodded, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. Jessica and Ryan moved to the center of the room, and she began to undress. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct told me to run. As their clothes hit the floor, my heart pounded, a mix of fear, anger, and morbid curiosity. What followed was a blur. Jessica and Ryan moved together, their bodies entwined, their moans filling the room. I sat there watching, feeling more detached from reality with each passing second. It was like watching a movie, something happening to someone else, not me, but the pain in my chest reminded me that this was very real. Jessica occasionally glanced at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of how I was feeling. I tried to keep my face neutral, but I'm sure she saw the turmoil inside me. Ryan, meanwhile, was entirely focused on her, his hands and lips moving over her body with practiced ease. After what felt like an eternity, it was over. Jessica and Ryan lay on the floor, catching their breath. Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange mix of satisfaction and concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded numbly, unable to speak. I wasn't okay. Not by a long shot, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Jessica stood up and came over to me, wrapping a robe around herself. She knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in hers. "Thank you, Kevin, for doing this. It means a lot to me." I looked at her, trying to find the woman I loved in those eyes, but all I saw was a stranger. "I don't know if I can do this again," I whispered. She nodded, understanding in her expression. "I know we don't have to, but I hope this helps you understand." "I hope so too," I replied, though I wasn't sure what I was hoping for anymore. We left Ryan's house shortly after. The drive home was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. When we got home, Jessica went straight to bed, but I stayed up, staring at the walls, trying to process everything. In the days that followed, Jess seemed happier, more relaxed. She assured me that things would get better, that this was a new chapter for us, but I felt more distant from her than ever. The image of her and Ryan together haunted me, replaying in my mind like a broken record. One evening, a week after the event, Jessica asked me to sit down. "Kevin, there's something else I need to tell you," she began, her tone serious. "What now?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping in. "There's another man. His name is Mark. He's older, and he meets different needs from me." My heart sank. "Another man?" "Jessica, listen," she cut in. "Mark knows about us, about Ryan. He wants to join all three of us together. I want you to watch again, and this time I want you to participate, to record it all. It's important to me, Kevin." I stared at her, a mix of disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "You want me to watch you with two men?" "Jessica, this is crazy. This isn't what marriage is supposed to be. This is what I need," she said firmly. "And if you love me, you'll at least try to understand. Please, Kevin, one more time for me." I felt like I was being sucked into a vortex, unable to escape. But despite everything, I still loved her. I wanted to save our marriage, to understand her. "Fine," I finally said, "one more time. But this is it, Jessica. If I can't handle this, we are done." She smiled, relief evident on her face. "Thank you, Kevin. You won't regret this." but deep down I knew I already did. The days leading up to the next encounter were filled with anxiety and dread. Jessica was buzzing with excitement, her happiness almost contagious, if not for the heavy weight on my chest. I tried to immerse myself in work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to what was coming. I wondered about this Mark, this older man who had apparently been seeing my wife behind my back. Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? When the night finally arrived, Jessica was practically glowing. She dressed carefully, selecting a black lace lingerie set that I had never seen before. "How do I look?" she asked, twirling in front of the mirror. "Beautiful," I muttered, though the sight of her dressed up for another man made my stomach churn. "Thank you," she said, giving me a quick kiss. "This is going to be great. Just trust me." We drove to Ryan's house again, the silence between us thicker than ever. When we arrived, Ryan greeted us at the door, his usual smirk in place. He led us into the living room, where the camera was already set up. And there, sitting casually on the couch, was Mark. Mark appeared to be in his early 50s, with silver hair and a confident demeanor that made him seem even more imposing. He stood up as we entered, extending a hand to me. "You must be Kevin. Jessica's told me a lot about you." I shook his hand reluctantly. "Yeah, I'm Kevin. Nice to meet you." "Likewise," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jessica moved to stand between Ryan and Mark, looking at me expectantly. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, let's get this over with." Jessica smiled and began to undress, her movements slow and deliberate. Ryan and Mark followed suit, and soon the three of them were standing naked in the center of the room. I took my place by the camera, my heart pounding in my chest. What followed was even more surreal than the first time. Watching Jessica with two men brought a level of humiliation and pain I hadn't anticipated. They took turns with her, each man fulfilling a different role while I stood there recording it all. Jessica seemed to revel in the attention, her moans and gasps filling the room. I felt like an intruder in my own life, watching from the outside as everything I thought I knew crumbled around me. At one point, Jessica looked over at me, her eyes a blend of pleasure and something else. "Kevin, come closer," she said breathlessly. I moved nearer, my hands shaking as I held the camera. Jessica reached out and touched my cheek, her fingers warm on my skin. "Thank you for doing this," she whispered. "It means everything to me." I nodded, unable to speak. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I watched as Ryan and Mark continued, feeling more disconnected from reality with every passing moment. Finally, it ended. Jessica lay on the floor, panting, her body glistening with sweat. Ryan and Mark helped her to her feet, their expressions satisfied. Jessica looked at me, her eyes softening. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted, my voice shaking. She nodded and hugged me. "I know this is hard for you, but I hope it helps you understand." "I don't know if I can do this again," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We'll take it one step at a time," she promised. "We'll figure it out together." We left Ryan's house shortly after, the weight of what had happened hanging heavily between us. When we got home, Jessica went straight to bed, but I stayed up, staring at the footage on the camera. I watched the scene repeatedly, trying to understand what Jessica found so fulfilling about it, but all I felt was anger and sadness. The next morning, I confronted Jessica. "I can't keep doing this," I said as soon as she woke up. "This isn't what marriage is supposed to be." She looked at me seriously. "I know it's hard, Kevin, but this is what I need. And if you love me, you'll try to understand." "I do love you," I said, my voice breaking, "but I don't know if I can handle this. It's tearing me apart." Jessica sighed, taking my hand. "I don't want to lose you, Kevin, but I also can't give this up. It's part of who I am. Maybe we can find a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" I asked, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Maybe we can set some boundaries," she suggested. "Figure out what you're comfortable with and what you're not. We can take it slow, see if there's a way to make this work for both of us." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what kind of boundaries could make this situation bearable. But I was willing to try for the sake of our marriage. "Okay, we'll try." Jessica smiled and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Kevin. We'll get through this, I promise." But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally broken. Jessica was happier, more relaxed, but I felt like a stranger in my own life. The images of her with Ryan and Mark haunted me, a constant reminder of how far we drifted apart. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Jessica turned to me with a serious expression. "Kevin, there's something I need to tell you." A sense of dread washed over me. "What now?" "There's another man," she said quietly. "His name is John. He's been watching the videos we've made, and he's interested in joining us." "Another man?" I repeated, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. "Jessica, this is too much. I can't keep doing this." "I know it's a lot to ask," she said softly, "but this is what I need, Kevin. This is who I am, and if you love me, you'll at least consider it." I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and despair. "You're asking too much, Jessica. This isn't fair." "I'm sorry," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, but I also can't deny who I am. Please, Kevin, just think about it." I nodded numbly, unable to say a word as she went to bed. I remained in the living room, feeling more lost than ever. I loved Jessica, but I wasn't sure if I could keep up with her demands. Something had to give, and I feared it would be our marriage. The days drifted by in a fog of confusion and inner turmoil. Jessica's request for another man, John, to join our already complicated situation weighed heavily on my mind. I tried to immerse myself in work, hoping to escape the chaos at home, but the thoughts kept creeping back. One evening after dinner, Jessica sat me down again. "Kevin, we need to talk about John," she said, her tone gentle yet firm. I sighed, preparing myself for another tough conversation. "Jessica, I don't know if I can handle this. It's already so overwhelming." She reached out, taking my hand in hers. "I understand, and I'm not trying to pressure you, but I need you to know this is important to me. I've already spoken with John, and he's willing to meet us to discuss boundaries. Maybe that would help." I felt a flicker of hope. "Boundaries like what?" "Like what we're all comfortable with," she explained. "We can talk about what's off limits, what you're okay with and what you're not. It's not just about me, Kevin. I want us to navigate this together." I nodded slowly, considering her words. "Okay, I'll meet him, but I'm not making any promises." She smiled, relief evident on her face. "Thank you, Kevin. That's all I'm asking." The meeting was set for the following weekend at a cozy cafe downtown. When Jessica and I arrived, John was already there, sitting at a corner table. He was in his late 40s with a distinguished look and a calm demeanor that put me slightly at ease. "Kevin, this is John," Jessica said, introducing us. "Nice to meet you," John said, extending his hand. "Likewise," I replied, shaking his hand. We sat down, and after some awkward small talk, Jessica got straight to the point. "John, I wanted us to talk about boundaries so Kevin can feel more comfortable with this." John nodded seriously. "Of course, Kevin. I want you to know that I respect your marriage and your feelings. I'm not here to cause problems, and I'm open to any boundaries you need to set." I took a deep breath, feeling a bit more in control. "All right, for starters, I don't want any of this happening in our home. It's too personal." "Agreed," John said immediately. "We can meet at Ryan's or my place, whichever you prefer. And I want to be involved in every decision," I continued. "No surprises. If anything changes, I need to know beforehand." "Absolutely," John said. "Transparency is crucial." Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for this, Kevin. I know it's not easy." "It's not," I admitted, "but if this is what you need, I'm willing to try. Just don't keep anything from me. I need to know I can trust you." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I promise." The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. Jessica and I continued our discussions, setting more boundaries, trying to navigate this new terrain. She seemed genuinely committed to making it work, and for a while I started to feel like maybe we could find a way through this. But then one night, I came home to find Jessica on the phone, her voice hushed and urgent. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call, her face pale. "Who was that?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Just a friend," she said quickly, "nothing important." I didn't believe her. "Which friend?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It was John. We were just discussing arrangements. Arrangements for what? I pressed, my anger rising. Just the next time we meet, she said, avoiding my gaze. Jessica, we agreed on transparency, I said, my voice shaking. You're supposed to tell me everything. I know, she said, tears filling her eyes. I'm sorry, Kevin. I didn't want to upset you. Well, you did. I snapped. I can't keep doing this if you're not going to be honest with me. I'm sorry, she repeated, reaching out to touch my arm. I'll do better, I promise. I wanted to believe her, but the seed of doubt had been planted once again. The following days were tense, and I found myself questioning everything. Was she really being honest? Was she keeping more from me? One evening while Jessica was out, I decided to check her phone. I knew it was wrong, a violation of her privacy, but I needed to know. I needed to see if she was hiding something. As I scrolled through her messages, my heart sank. There were countless texts from John, many of them explicit, detailing their plans and desires. Worse, there were messages from other men, names I didn't recognize. It wasn't just Ryan and Mark. John wasn't the only new addition. Jessica had been seeing other men, and I had no idea. When Jessica came home, I confronted her right away. You lied to me, I said, holding up her phone. You've been seeing other men and didn't tell me. Her face turned pale, and she stammered. Kevin, I can explain. Explain what? I shouted, my anger boiling over. Explain how you've been lying to me? How you've been betraying me over and over. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you would leave me. Well, you should have thought of that before, I said coldly. I can't do this anymore, Jessica. We're done. Kevin, please, she begged, her voice breaking. Don't leave me. I love you. You don't love me, I said, my voice hollow. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. I walked out, leaving her sobbing on the floor. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had loved Jessica, and a part of me always would, but the trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. There was no going back now. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. The first few nights after I left Jessica were a blur. I checked into a motel and tried to focus on anything but the gaping hole in my chest. I felt like I was in free fall, unsure of where I would land. I replayed our conversations, our fights, and the moments that had led to this breaking point. Each memory was like a dagger, twisting deeper with every recollection. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my projects, staying late into the night to avoid the emptiness that waited for me at the motel. My coworkers noticed the change, but were polite enough not to ask, except for Sarah. Sarah was a close friend and one of the few people at work who knew about my troubles with Jessica. She knocked on my office door one evening, her concern evident. Hey, Kevin, got a minute? Sure, I said, forcing a smile. What's up? She closed the door behind her and sat down. I've noticed you've been staying late a lot. Everything okay? I sighed, rubbing my temples. It's been rough, Sarah. Jessica and we're done. I couldn't take it anymore. Her expression softened, and she reached out to touch my hand. I'm so sorry, Kevin. I knew things were tough, but I didn't realize it was that bad. It's a long story, I said, looking away. I just need to move on. If you ever need to talk, I'm here, she said gently. Or if you need a distraction, we could grab a drink sometime. No pressure. I hesitated, then nodded. A drink sounds good. Thanks, Sarah. That weekend, Sarah and I went to a quiet bar downtown. It felt strange to be out, trying to enjoy myself, but Sarah's presence was comforting. We talked about work, our families, and eventually Jessica. I'm sorry for bringing this up, but I need to know, Sarah said, her eyes earnest. What exactly happened with Jessica? You don't have to share if it's too painful. I took a deep breath and told her everything. The late nights, the other men, the betrayals.